Imprisoned for opposing genocide. The UK government is accused of silencing dissent and cracking down on protests against Israel as Tel Aviv continues its war on Gaza. Many say free speech and the right to protest are under attack, specifically when it comes to criticism of Israel's continued war on Gaza. I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the UK will recognise a Palestinian state in September unless Israel meets certain conditions. That's agreeing on a ceasefire and committing to a peace process. But for many in the UK and in Palestine, those words mean nothing. And now British citizens who have taken to the streets to protest against the genocide are being arrested and detained under terror laws. Well, joining us to take a closer look at all of this, we have Clare Hinchcliffe, the mother of Zoe Rogers, who was involved in a Palestine Action protest and is currently detained in a UK prison awaiting trial. We also have Laura O'Brien, partner and head of the protest and public order team at Hodge, Jones and Allen, and Matt Kennard. He's an investigative journalist and author, and all of our three guests are joining us from London. Clare, if I could start with you. Your daughter has been imprisoned for almost a year now. She cannot speak out for herself. Why did she do what she did when it comes to taking direct action rather than just simply taking to the streets and holding a placard?
So Zoe is someone who's got a passion for social justice. She was only 20 years old when she took direct action, and that was following months and months of protests, attending protests, and seeing the government completely ignoring the demands of the protesters. And then she came across direct action. As a concept, she came across Palestine Action. And I remember her telling me, "Mum, I think this is the only thing that's going to work. We have to hit the arms industry in their profits. That's the bottom line. That's the only language they understand. This is the only way we have to take action ourselves. We cannot stand by and watch a genocide." Unknown to me, she then joined with Palestine Action, and she took action with them in August last year against Elbit Systems, Israel's biggest arms manufacturer hub in Filton in Bristol. And she has been, it was actually a year today that I had 4 police officers come to my door and say, "Your daughter is detained in the Bristol police station." And I didn't hear from her for nearly 2 weeks because of the way she was treated under the Terrorism Act.
It's extraordinary, is it? Matt, I want to go to you in a second because you have extensive experience and research into the military details. I saw you nodding as well. Laura, legally, the laws that the government are using to do this, how would you break that down? It's prescribed Palestine Action as what it calls a terrorist group. The UK government assesses that Palestine Action commits and participates in acts of terrorism. In several attacks, Palestine Action has committed acts of serious damage to property with the aim of progressing its political cause and influencing the government. The seriousness of these attacks includes the extent and nature of damage caused, including to targets affecting UK national security and the impact on innocent members of the public. How would you break that down?
I think the first thing is that this comes in the backdrop of about 5 or 6 years of restriction on protests, new offences, increased sentencing powers, and unprecedented numbers of people in prison for peaceful protest. But the decision to start using terrorism legislation for direct action protests marks a very, very dark chapter. The nature of terrorism legislation is it is incredibly broad, and so it requires a very careful, considered and proportionate use by those in government, by police and by prosecutors. And what we have seen is exactly the opposite to that. These are not new types of action. Direct action is not new, but it does very much feel like the use of terrorism legislation is because of what this direct action is about, because this is about Gaza and because this is about criticism of the arms industry.
Well, that's the perfect segue to Matt. You've done extensive research into British foreign policy, particularly the arms industry. How would you describe what the government, the UK government, is doing, both politically and militarily?
In terms of the intelligence role, we've been flying daily spy flights over Gaza for Israel since December 2023. Actually, also, Israeli military planes that were involved in bombing Gaza have been landing secretly at RAF Brize Norton, which was one of the sites that Palestine Action recently targeted, and was actually the action that precipitated the prescription under the Terrorism Act. So it's a very Orwellian situation. The whole world is upside down, particularly in this country. And it's unprecedented, but I think it goes to the fact that we've watched nearly 2 years of genocide and our government participate in it. And the ruling class in Britain has lost control of the narrative and lost control of the population. The population do not support what is happening in Gaza. A majority of people want an arms embargo. A majority want the assault to end. And although the mainstream media has largely echoed the government position, it hasn't worked. And people are going out in their millions on the streets still. Direct action people are still trying to throw their bodies on the gears of the genocidal machine. So in that situation where you have a ruling class and a media class who are completely at odds with the population, you only have one recourse left, which is to use the law to discipline the population, which is what we're seeing. And it's unprecedented, as was mentioned, to use terrorism laws to target a direct action group. It's absurd and deeply, deeply scary for anyone who cares about civil liberties and freedoms in this country, because once that threshold is crossed, power does not give itself new tools to go after dissidents and then go back home and forget about it. They use those tools to go after more and more people.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Matt, because that does lead me to, there was a recent YouGov poll that shows that more and more people in the UK are against the war on Gaza. Even if in the beginning they said that Israel had a right to intervene, they say it's gone too far. Well, let's look at some reaction online.
How is it taken as a threat to Israel, the recognition of a state that should have been recognized 75, 80, 90 years ago, especially because the current situation is well and truly of Britain's making. Right back to the Balfour Declaration, where we as a country promised to give away what was not ours to give away in the first place.
Laura, the Balfour Declaration being referred to there, 1917, seen by many historians as laying the groundwork for the Israel-Palestine conflict. Do you think this reflects in the way the government is handling that? You did say earlier that terror laws are being used specifically when it comes to Israel. How would you contextualize that?
I think going back to what Matthew has said about the role of the arms industry, unfortunately, there is an economic interest in the arms industry. And what we have seen is the politicization of an approach to genocide. So instead of this just being about what is right, about what everyone sees as outrageous, this is about political interests and economic interests. I think it's really important to look at the parallels about what's happening in Gaza and what's happening here at a time when voices in Gaza are being silenced with the banning of international journalists in Gaza. It's so much more important that voices speaking out for people in Gaza aren't silenced here in the UK. And that's exactly what this is about. This is about protecting political positions and economic interests.
Matt, a lot of people have become, I think, beyond frustrated, doesn't even begin to explain it. We are watching a genocide, a war play out in real time in the era of social media. No one can say that they're not aware of what is going on. What do you think Gaza has done to how many people view their governments in the UK, but also internationally? Is this giving us a message?
Yeah, well, I think that I really think the world has changed completely now, because obviously the Western world and how it's presented itself was often at odds with how it acted in the world. That's never been as clear as it is now, because there's been previous genocides which have been supported by Washington, London, Berlin, obviously. But they haven't been live streamed on our phones in this way. Everyone is watching this every day when they get up in the morning. For 2 years, I've been looked at Twitter and seen countless dead children, starving children, people shot in the head, families obliterated with bombs. And they've seen at the same time their elected leaders come out and support it all, and basically not have any problems with providing more arms, providing more spies, providing more logistics equipment.
But Matt, we're not seeing mass protests, right? We're not seeing mass protests across the world, though, are we?
Well, I think we are. We're seeing mass protests in the UK. I mean, I can speak to that context more knowledgeably, but we've seen more sustained mass protests over this issue than anything, I think, previously in history, or at least modern history. So I think that it is, the problem is that it doesn't work, because we've gone out week after week and nothing's changed with our government. But this goes to the second point. I think another realization that people have had, not just about the role of Britain and America in the world, but also about our own societies. We don't actually live in democracies. The fact that we have a majority won an arms embargo, the fact that we have millions of people that will go out on the streets to try and stop the genocide, that force, that power of the people does not percolate into the political system. And there's a massive barrier between the will of the people and the political and ruling class. And I think that's never been more obvious as well. I'll finish with this. There's another important point. It's also highlighted the fact that on foreign policy, there's literally zero difference between the two main parties in the UK or in America. The Democrats were overseeing the genocide for over a year. So were the Conservatives here. They changed the Republicans in Washington. They changed the Labour in London. And the same thing happened exactly the same way. And it goes to show we don't have a democratic system. We don't have a plurality of political opinions within the two-party system here. And I think that, to be honest with you, I do a lot of talks. I just say I do a lot of talks now at places around the world, and I often get like older grannies coming up to me saying, "I've read the Daily Telegraph all my life, and I can't believe what I've seen the last 2 years. It's completely changed my whole understanding of the world." And I think that's happened on a global level.
I think that brings it back to values. Claire, I want to ask you, as a mother, your daughter is currently being detained. From what I understood, she spent some time in solitary confinement for fighting and raising her voice for her values. How would you describe how this makes you feel? And what are her values? Maybe just set it up that way. I mean, we're all seeing these horrendous images coming out, and it really bothered her, didn't it?
It did. And can I just start by saying that the prescription of Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation has such a chilling effect that I can literally not tell you how I feel about the action my daughter took without risking 14 years in prison. This is where we've got to. It's like thought police. So I won't tell you how I feel about her action. I will tell you how I feel about her as a person. And I'm blown away. I am so proud. I'm so proud of her. The first thing she did when she finally was able to speak to me from prison, nearly 2 weeks after she was put in prison as a high security prisoner, she was denied bail, as they all were. The first thing she said was, "Mum, I'm so sorry for what I put you through. You must have been worried sick. I'm so sorry." And I just said, you do not need to be sorry. The people who need to be sorry are Netanyahu and Starmer, not you. And I'm just proud of her that she's the kind of person who puts justice, and she's done this throughout her life. Even as a child, she would defend her little sister. She'll stand up to teachers and people in authority who she thinks are being unfair, including myself. And she's right to have done that. Even though she's actually quite an anxious person, she had social anxiety so severely for a couple of years she couldn't go to school. She really struggles with fear, and yet she has that courage to take on what she believes is wrong and do it with her whole body. And the result is 12 months now. She's been in custody for 12 months, and so have 10 of a group. There are now 24 associated with this case. They keep arresting more people. And you did mention, Claire, that she spent some time in solitary confinement. Is that correct? Correct. Yes. So this was the where the unprecedented nature started. So I was told she was under arrest, and I expected to hear a phone call for her to come home within 24 hours, and that phone call never came. And then finally, someone informed me that she'd been rearrested in the middle of the night under the Terrorism Act, and that they were able to detain them without charge for 14 days. In the end, it was 7 days, and then they charged them. I saw her in Westminster Magistrates Court through 2 layers of security glass. I expected at that point for her to be given bail. But because they were only ordinary criminal charges like criminal damage, but they were all refused bail, and this is because there is a so-called terrorist connection applied to their case. That was completely unprecedented at the time. So they all denied bail, and repeated bail applications have failed, including for one young man who was the sole carer of his sick parents. He actually applied for bail, and with 20 great character witness statements, he was granted bail by a High Court judge, and within 48 hours, the prosecution had overturned it, and he never went home.
Let me jump in there,
like
Claire. Sorry, because I want to still get to so many points before we run out of time. Laura, when it comes, you mentioned this earlier, you touched on this, vandalizing property, trespassing, as methods of protest are not new, correct? But they're now being used under the terrorism law. Like, break this down for us. And is this the longest that protesters have been held without a pre-trial?
So yes, it's absolutely right that direct action involving serious damage and trespass are not new. I mean, the government would have you think that the direct action in and of itself is unprecedented, but it's not. And you will see different causes behind different spikes in direct action, you know, campaigns against nuclear arms, campaigns in relation to animal rights. But it isn't new. These are not new methods. These are not new types of offences. I think it's also really important here to pause in the context of the prescription of Palestine Action and say that actually Palestine Action have been involved in actions which have not always included serious damage, not always included any type of damage, sometimes just a matter of throwing paint, very low level damage. So this is not at all even that Palestine Action in and of themselves are a new brand. What we're talking about is a handful of actions that Palestine Action have been involved in, which the government say have crossed the line to fall within the definition of terrorism.
Because often, sorry to jump in there, but often terrorism for us lay people is interpreted as killing civilians, as attacking.
Absolutely.
Right?
Which is exactly why the judge in the High Court, when looking at the judicial review case, has acknowledged that this is capable, the prescription of Palestine Action is capable of redefining our relationship with the concept of terrorism and the public faith in terrorism legislation going forward, because it really has challenged what we all think of as terrorism compared to what the government are declaring as terrorism.
Okay, before I go to Matt, Claire, go ahead. You wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, just so I've learned a lot, obviously, about the Terrorism Act since my daughter's been considered a terrorist, apparently. And one of the things I've learned is that under UK law, it's very bad practice compared to international good standards of law, because you can be defined as a terrorist for serious property damage. You don't have to kill anyone, injure anyone, or take anyone hostage. Mere property damage if it reaches a certain level. So that was raised back in 2003 in the Supreme Court, and UK was told to address that. It wasn't addressed, and now it was wide open to abuse, and now it's being abused. So we're being told that damaging property can be classed as terrorism, which would class the suffragettes as terrorists, which would class Green and Common women as terrorists. So this is, and the UN has raised this. UN rapporteur has said this is not good practice, and the UK needs to sort out its definition of terrorism.
Again, as Claire said, we're limited in what we can say, and actually this is an important point, that I think the prescription was more about an attack on free speech than it was about needing new tools to go after Palestine Action. That's my perspective, because part of that section of the Terrorism Act, which people can be prosecuted under with Palestine Action, is that if you're a member, it's a legal right. But there's also a section that voicing support for a prescribed organisation can carry up to 14 years. So what they want to do is stop the wide support there is for Palestine Action. And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason that Palestine Action are being targeted. And it goes to the Martin Luther King quote. They're the ones that have had direct material gains for the cause. They've shut down factories which are producing weaponry which is being used in a genocide in Gaza. So it's very clear that they're the only ones really in the UK context that have actually had material gains for the cause and actually fulfilled their role under the Genocide Convention of trying to stop genocide when it's underway. So this is what I'm saying. It literally is Orwellian, what we're seeing. And it's extremely scary because it shows that the government now does not really care about the PR side of things because they've been attacked within the mainstream. This isn't just a sort of fringe left cause now. There's been many people within the mainstream denouncing this and saying it's extremely dangerous. You even had Sally Rooney, who's one of the most famous novelists in the world, coming out and saying she supports Palestine Action just before the prescription. And she said, I'll continue doing that even if they are prescribed. So what are they going to do? Put Sally Rooney in prison? I think it's unworkable. But again, it goes to show how panicked they are. And I think it is a sign of the success of Palestine Action because they have made material gains for the cause. And as I said earlier, the protests, while I support them wholeheartedly, obviously they haven't worked. And if you're actually a moral human being and looking at what's happening in Gaza, and as you mentioned, the devastation is unimaginable. We just had the clips from the journalists that took footage over Gaza yesterday from the aid flights, and literally Gaza is erased. There's whole parts of it that just don't exist. Now, if you're a moral human being in one of the countries which is participating in it, surely your first thought is, what can I do to stop this? What can I do to stop my government participating in it? And Palestine Action had a model, that they thought met that test, and they enacted it. And I think the government's draconian actions against the actionists themselves and against the organisation show that they have that they were spot on in terms of their strategic outlook.
Claire, you voted for Keir Starmer and for Labour, I understand. How does that make you feel now?
So angry and so sad. I have been in tears about this. I voted for Labour because I saw that Keir Starmer had been a former human rights lawyer, because I thought this man and his party will have a moral compass. And to see him participating, as Matt has said, directly in a genocide and imprisoning as terrorists the people who tried to oppose that genocide and the arming of it, that I feel literally stabbed in the back. And I would say that to his face. I feel deeply betrayed by this government.
Laura, I'm going to give you the final thought, short please, because we are running out of time. The law, shouldn't it be there to protect us, right? We have international law, we have human rights law, we have the law, to protect freedom of speech, the right to protest, everything that we're seeing now. Has it gone too far?
Absolutely. And I think, first of all, the courts have recognised, although we're not seeing it in practice, that actually people being able to express dissent and different voices being heard is an outlet. That's what ensures peace, that people can disagree with each other and that we can criticise those that are in power. And stifling free speech and stifling protest undermines democracy and it undermines peace domestically and internationally.
Well, that is all we have time for. Such an important discussion. Clare, Laura and Matt, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for being part of the conversation, and I'll see you soon. The UK's government outlawed Palestine Action on July 5th, days after it took responsibility for a break-in at an Air Force base in southern England that caused an estimated $9.3 million of damage to 2 aircraft. Palestine Action said its activists were responding to Britain's indirect military support for Israel amid the war in Gaza. Britain's Interior Ministry has insisted that Palestine Action was also suspected of other serious attacks that involved violence, significant injuries, and extensive criminal damage. But critics, including the United Nations and groups such as Amnesty International and Greenpeace, have condemned its prescription as legal overreach and a threat to free speech. Police across the UK have made hundreds of arrests since the July 5th ban on Palestine Action. The prescription states that being a member of Palestine Action or supporting the group is a criminal offence punishable by up to 14 years in prison. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said in July the UK will formally recognise the state of Palestine in September unless Israel takes various substantive steps, including agreeing to a ceasefire in Gaza.